Now, you might have a problem with my premise. You can say that people just care more about dogs, so the difference in enforcement of these two laws is because of the kind of animal, not because one is a welfare law and the other is an abolition law. Fair interjection, here's why I think it's wrong. Today I want to tell you about two laws in the US that are concerned with the well-being of animals. One is a welfare law and the other is an abolition law. The 28-hour law is the Welfare Act that the Congress of the United States enacted in 1873, then repealed and replaced in 1906, and repealed and reenacted it in amended form in 1994. The law in its current form states that a carrier transporting animals interstate may not confine animals in a vehicle or vessel for more than 28 consecutive hours without unloading the animals for feeding, water, and rest. If transport will exceed 28 consecutive hours, animals must be unloaded in a humane manner, put into pens equipped with feed and water, and allowed to rest for at least 5 hours before the transport is resumed. The 28 hours do not include the time it takes to load and unload the animals, so imagine not eating and drinking for about 30 hours while being packed and in transit. Terrible. There are 4 exceptions to the law. Sheep may be confined for additional 8 hours when the 28-hour period ends at night. Animals may be confined for more than 28 hours when there is an accident or unavoidable circumstances. Animals may be confined for 36 consecutive hours when the owner or custodian requests in writing that the period be extended. The law does not apply when animals are transported in a vehicle or vessel in which the animals have food, water, space, and an opportunity to rest, which for welfare laws for chickens, for instance, we know might mean jack shit. The law applies to cows, sheep, pigs, mules, and horses. Subsequently, it does not apply to chickens, turkeys, fish, and other animals, but as we'll see in a bit, it barely applies to animals at all. At the time the law was actually upheld, there was a bit of drama surrounding the law. On July 28, 1905, the Holt County Sentinel reported the following: the 28-hour law is supported by certain humane organizations, but on the whole is regarded by stockmen as a useless and unreasonable restriction upon shipper and carrier. The law was for many years a dead letter, but Secretary Wilson believes in enforcing laws and has had his inspectors at work collecting evidence to prove that it is being disregarded. The Secretary is now prepared to begin 12,000 suits against railroads for violations of the law. He is asked to extend time from 28 to 32 hours and waive prosecution in the cases at hand, but firmly refuses to do so, at least for now. So this is why I think transport time for sheep is different to other animals. Shoshone Journal reports on January 26, 1906, Fred W. Gooding, who heads the delegation of Idaho stockmen, is advocating a 36-hour law. He believes that after a 36-hour ride, the sheep will be so hungry that they will eat when unloaded, whereas they refuse to eat after a 28-hour ride. Looking at it from another standpoint, Mr. Gooding says that a 36-hour law would make a difference of 2 days in the time required to ship sheep from Idaho range to Chicago, as 2 feeding days would be saved. It's all about the money. But what is of equal importance, he says that experience has demonstrated that sheep unloaded every 36 hours reach Chicago in better condition and weighing more than sheep that are unloaded every 28 hours. Supposedly because the journey altogether is shorter? I'm not sure. One thing is certain, this is again all about the money. Indeed, according to his statement, Idaho sheep that unloaded once in 36 hours will bring from 10 to 20 cents more a head. The Agricultural Department, which is charged with the enforcement of the 28-hour law, is convinced that it should be changed and inclines to the 36-hour substitute proposed by the Idaho men. It is expected that Secretary Wilson will appear before the committees of the Senate and House along with the sheepmen and lend his aid to secure the necessary amendment. Staunton Spectator and Vindicator reports on January 4, 1907 that despite the opposition of the humane societies and with the aid of strong lobby, The law was amended to 36 hours. Since then, however, they have been violating the law more flagrantly than before it was amended. The Department of Agriculture has found that cattle were kept on board the car as much as 90 hours without food or drink, and the solicitor of the department has collected over 500 cases in which evidence is conclusive. That was back then, but what is happening these days? Well, first of all, the penalty for breaking the law, as established in 1873 to be $100 to $500, has remained the same, which is weird because if adjusted for inflation, it was supposed to be at minimum $2,321 and at maximum $11,607. So today the incentive to not break this animal welfare law is virtually non-existent. Second, it's rarely being enforced. The enforcement authority is unclear. It's on one of three agencies, two of them, US Department of Justice, DOJ, and the US Department of Transportation, DOT, don't have regulations to assist with enforcing of this law, and the third, USDA, US Department of Agriculture, has taken some responsibility and has made inquiries into possible violations, but hasn't submitted any of them to the DOJ because 1. USDA personnel is not provided with the guidance needed to understand their role in the law enforcement, and 2. Drivers are not required to provide documentation of the duration, mileage, or stops made on their trips. Sounds terrible, but now let's compare and contrast with an abolition law. Enter Animal Fighting Prohibition Enforcement Act, the 2007 amendments to the Animal Welfare Act that at first prohibited animal fighting ventures that involve interstate or foreign commerce, and then was amended in 2014 to add prohibition against attending fighting events and imposed an additional penalty for bringing minors to fighting events. It's a federal law and each violation can result in up to 3 years in jail and $250,000 fine. What a contrast to the penalties for 28-hour law. You can torture 2 animals, still terrible of course, and potentially go to jail. Or you can torture 200 animals and maybe get fined $500, but not really. And what about enforcement? The DOJ on their animal welfare page lists both laws as their responsibility, and yet in the list of prosecuted cases, animal fighting appears 10 times in 2022 and 23 times since 2014, but 28-hour law appears 0 times as we already knew. Now you might have a problem with my premise. You can say that people just care more about dogs, so the difference in enforcement of these 2 laws is because of the kind of animal, not because one is a welfare law and the other is an abolition law. Fair interjection, here's why I think it's wrong. The Animal Fighting Prohibition Enforcement Act doesn't specify an animal, and there are prosecuted cases of cockfighting. Chickens aren't even included in the welfare law, but are included in the abolition law. So you can't tell me there is no care for the specific most eaten farmed animal. You can also claim that maybe animals are no longer transported such long distances in the US, but that's not accurate. Just remember, the USDA has found evidence for cases of the 28-hour law being broken, they just didn't prosecute them. Furthermore, this article reports on long-distance transport up to 2 consecutive days, but none of them were prosecuted. Maybe it's the time difference. Maybe in 100 years the animal fighting law will be as dead in the water as the transportation law. Only time will tell, but let me remind you 2 things. Animal fighting doesn't have a lobby to manipulate the law, and people who initiate and participate in these activities are considered criminals. And this is the direct result of being an abolitionist law. To summarize, an abolitionist law gets more prohibitive with time as opposed to the welfare law, carries a harsher sentence, thus being more effective in deterring from breaking the law, and is enforced more heavily. Did it prevent all animal fighting? No, but it did prevent some or most of it. Made animal fighting shameful, illegal, underground, less accessible to potential customers. But even a greater point is, the welfare law is incredibly cruel to animals and is attempting to prevent some amount of suffering to animals, while ignoring the overall suffering and giving heavier weight to the money that can be exchanged for the animals as a product, whereas the abolition law is actually trying to prevent all parts of the cruel practice despite it being profitable. Well, that's it for this video. I have all my sources in a link to a citation website, you can check it out. Please subscribe, hit the bell. Tap the like button if you like. The other button is there as well. See you next time.